Let's dive into one of history's most persistent and frankly disturbing legends, the Headless People.
Just imagine for a moment that across every ocean, every empire, every culture you can think of, people were all telling the exact same terrifying story. A story about beings who looked and fought just like us, but were missing one pretty crucial thing: a head.
Now, it's easy to just dismiss these as folklore, right? But what if that's a mistake? What if all these separate accounts actually point to something much, much stranger, and maybe much more real?
See, the truly bizarre part of this mystery isn't that one culture made up a story about a headless monster. It's that it seems like every major culture did.
I mean, this wasn't just some local campfire story. The ancient Greeks wrote about them. Roman historians actually documented them in official records. Cultures all the way from China and India to Japan and the Amazon described the exact same beings. For millennia, it was a consistent global pattern. And then, sometime around the late 1500s, the stories just stopped, dead.
And this is where the mystery really deepens, because they didn't just fade into folklore over time the way myths usually do. They vanished from the historical record, completely.
For thousands of years, they were treated as a fact of life, like a known people you might run into on the edges of the map. And then suddenly, nothing. It's as if an entire species was just erased from the world overnight, leaving nothing but these haunting stories.
So, this leaves us with two absolutely enormous questions. If they were real, where in the world did they go? And if they weren't real, why did the entire world spend thousands of years so convinced that they were?
To try and answer that, we're going to explore three possibilities. And I'll warn you, each one is a little more unsettling than the last.
So let's start with what seems like the most rational, maybe even scientific explanation.
Okay, so this theory suggests these weren't monsters at all, but actual people who were suffering from a really rare genetic condition. You know, in isolated communities, certain deformities, like a severely sunken head or a posture that hid the neck, could become more common, and then travelers' tales would just exaggerate what they saw.
But this theory has some major problems. A simple genetic quirk doesn't explain the incredible consistency of the descriptions, specifically having faces on their chests, and it definitely doesn't explain why you have these sober-minded Roman generals documenting fighting entire armies of them in battle.
This brings us to a much, much darker possibility.
What if these beings weren't born from nature, but from human cruelty? We already know ancient cultures practiced some pretty extreme body modification, from foot binding to skull elongation. This theory suggests that someone, somewhere, took this to a horrifying new level, figuring out how to reshape the human body to create these beings on purpose.
The implication here is chilling. They weren't a species or a race. They were victims. People who weren't born, but were made into monsters to serve some forgotten, awful purpose. It's a deeply disturbing thought, but even that feels incomplete. It doesn't explain the global scale or why they all disappeared at once. And that brings us to our third and final theory. And honestly, this one is the most chilling of all, precisely because it doesn't require any monsters. Not a single one. What if Headless was never meant to be a literal, physical description? What if it was a metaphor, a political weapon used by expanding empires to describe the people they were conquering, a way to dehumanize them?
So what does it really mean to call an entire population of people headless?
Okay, this theory just clicks everything into place. Instead of a literal monster with no head, just imagine a symbolic one, a people with no recognized identity, no voice, no real agency. They weren't just fought in physical battles, they were being conquered by empires. And here's the kicker. They didn't just vanish from history, they were absorbed into it. Their unique cultures were totally erased until they became indistinguishable from their conquerors. That would explain the sudden, total silence in the historical record. The head, I mean, it's the ultimate symbol of our identity, of our will, our thoughts. To describe a people as headless was a way to declare they had no independent culture, no right to rule themselves. They were basically rendered faceless, just a mass to be controlled.
And this is where this ancient mystery suddenly becomes incredibly modern and incredibly personal.
Because if the headless people were really just conquered populations who had their identities systematically erased, then they never actually went anywhere, did they?
The true horror of this legend, then, isn't some monster from a nightmare.
It's the chillingly real process of people losing their individuality, their unique culture, their voice, of being absorbed into a larger whole so completely that they don't even know what it is they've lost.
And that leaves us with a final, really unsettling question. The real mystery isn't whether the headless people were real. It's how often we create them, even today, by erasing the cultures and identities of others. You have to wonder, how many civilizations throughout all of history have truly lost their heads without a single drop of blood ever being spilled?